Not all guilt is a signal that something went wrong. Some guilt is a signal that someone long ago needed you to feel responsible so they didn't have to. Sit with that for a moment. Not because it's dramatic. Because something in you already knows it's true, and has been waiting a long time for someone to say it plainly. There's a particular kind of tired that isn't physical. It doesn't come from not sleeping. It isn't fixed by rest. It's the tiredness of someone who has been on duty for so long they've forgotten there was ever a shift change. Who wakes up in the morning already scanning, already calculating, already bracing. You felt it? Maybe you feel it now. This low-level hum of wrongness that doesn't have a source. This sense that something, somewhere, is your fault, even when you can't point to what it is. Even when everyone around you says you've done nothing wrong. Especially then. You apologize when someone else is cold. You shrink before someone else's anger. You take a step back when someone needs space and then spend 3 days wondering if you caused them to need it. Someone is unhappy in the room, and before you've even registered that you noticed, your body has already started moving toward fixing it. Not because you're weak. Not because you're anxious in a clinical sense, though it may have become that. But because you learned very early that other people's emotional states were your terrain. That the weather inside someone else was something you were somehow responsible for. And you were good at it. That was the trap. You were so good at reading people, at sensing what they needed, at making the temperature drop just slightly, that it became who you were. And the problem with becoming something is that you forget you chose it. Think about the specific texture of this guilt. Not the guilt that follows a clear action. The lie you told, the person you let down, the thing you said that you wish you could take back. That guilt has an address. You can walk to it, knock on the door, and try to make it right. It is uncomfortable, but it is navigable. It points somewhere. It says, this is what you did and here is what you might do now. The guilt that has no address is different. It doesn't point anywhere. It simply rests on you, formless and permanent, like something that arrived before you were old enough to refuse delivery. You feel it when someone seems disappointed. You feel it when a conversation ends and you're not sure how. You feel it in the silence after you've said something honest. You feel it, sometimes, just for existing in a way that requires space. You have probably spent a long time trying to locate the source of it. Running mental inventories. Cataloging your failures. Looking for the specific crime that would explain the sentence you seem to be serving. And you find small things. Moments of selfishness, times you could have done better, words said too quickly or not at all. And for a moment the guilt locks onto those things and it feels like a match. Until the small things are resolved or explained or forgotten, and the guilt is still there. Unchanged. As if it were never really about those things at all. Because it wasn't. It never was. You are not guilty. You are borrowed. Something that belongs to someone else has been living inside you so long that you've started calling it by your name. You can see this mechanism most clearly in someone who isn't you. Someone who stands outside himself, in the memory. Marcus grew up in a house with a particular quality of silence. Not the comfortable silence of people who have nothing urgent to say. The loaded silence of a woman who was managing something enormous inside herself and had no one to help her with it. His mother was not cruel. She was not absent in the obvious ways. She was present, physically, consistently, and in tremendous pain that she had nowhere to put. He was 4 when he first noticed that her face changed when he came into the room. That there was a particular quality to her attention when he was nearby. He didn't have words for it yet, but something in him registered the information the way a compass registers north, automatically, before thought. She needed something. And he was somehow connected to whether she got it. By 7, he had developed what you might call, in the generous language of adulthood, a remarkable emotional intelligence. He could read her the way some children learn to read weather. The angle of her shoulders. The specific quality of her pauses at the dinner table. Whether she'd slept. Whether something had happened that day that she hadn't told anyone about. He learned to move through the house on instinct. Lighter when she was fragile, present when she was low, carefully cheerful in ways that were not quite performance but were not quite natural either. He was the child who made things better. That was the role and no one had given it to him. He had simply moved into it because it was there and because he could. He was good at it. That is the thing about this particular story that cannot be skipped over. He was genuinely good at it. And the goodness of it, the fact that it worked, that his mother did sometimes seem lighter when he managed things correctly, that her face did sometimes change when he walked into the room in the right way, the goodness of it sealed the mechanism in place the way heat seals a wound. Not healing it. Just closing it over, below the surface, where it could continue doing what it was doing without being visible. By his 30s, Marcus is in his 3rd serious relationship. He is, by every external measure, a thoughtful partner. He notices things. He responds to moods before they're named. He is skilled at anticipating need, at creating space, at smoothing tension before it escalates. The women he has been with have used words like attentive and caring and safe. And he is those things. Genuinely. But he is also, though he doesn't have the language for it yet, unable to distinguish between someone being unhappy with him and someone simply being unhappy. These two things in his body feel identical. The activation is the same. The response is the same. His partner has a difficult day at work, and something in him reads it as emergency, as something to fix, as something he may, in ways he can't quite see, have caused. She says more than once, "I'm just tired, it's not about you." And he nods. And something in him doesn't believe her. Not because he thinks she's lying, but because the part of him that is still 7 years old, still reading his mother's shoulders, still calculating the temperature of a room, cannot access the concept of someone else's emotional state being separate from his responsibility for it. He doesn't know yet what he is carrying. He doesn't know that what he calls his sensitivity is also a wound. He doesn't know that the guilt he feels when she closes herself off, that immediate, wordless sense that he has done something wrong, that he needs to find the thing he did and repair it, that this guilt is older than she is, that it was formed before he could speak, that it belongs, in some fundamental sense, to someone who is no longer in the room. He doesn't know. Not yet. But something in him is beginning to wonder why it never gets lighter, no matter how well he does. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the territory of what the psyche inherits, not genetically but structurally, through proximity and need and the terrible efficiency with which children absorb what adults cannot hold. He called it, in some contexts, the shadow, the repository of everything that cannot be acknowledged, cannot be processed, cannot be lived openly, and so gets handed downward through the generations in the only form available to it, which is feeling. What Jung was pointing to was not some mystical transmission. It was something far more mundane and far more devastating. A parent carries something they cannot metabolize: grief, shame, rage, helplessness, the feeling of having wasted their own life. And because they cannot metabolize it, it becomes ambient. It becomes the texture of the house. It becomes the weather that children grow up inside without ever being told what the weather is. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, Jung wrote in a line that has been quoted so often it has almost lost its edge, and yet, held against what we are discussing, it cuts clean. Because the child who absorbs a parent's unprocessed shame does not accept themselves completely. They accept the parent's version of what the child must be responsible for. They accept guilt that was handed to them in the dark, without their knowledge, as a condition of being loved. What Jung understood, and what his clinical work kept returning to, was that this absorption is not a failure of the child. It is a success. The child who takes on the parent's shame is a child who learned that taking it on was the price of safety. The absorption is adaptive. It is intelligence operating under constraint. And the tragedy is not that it happened. The tragedy is that it persists long after the constraint is gone, because the nervous system does not distinguish between the past and the present with anything like the precision we'd like it to have. Jung also wrote, in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. Not the cruelty, not the abuse, the unlived life. The potential that was never realized, the choices that were never made, the self that was never allowed to emerge. These become, through the intimacy of childhood, something the child carries forward, often without knowing what it is or where it came from. Just the weight. The specific, directionless, objectless weight. What this means, taken into the lived language of someone sitting with that familiar guilt right now, is this: the heaviness is real. You are not imagining it. You are not weak for feeling it. But the thing you are carrying may not have originated inside you. It may be something you picked up in a room where the adults were too tired, too broken, too overwhelmed to hold it themselves. And you, because you were sensitive, because you were perceptive, because you loved them, you reached out your small hands and you took it. Alice Miller named this mechanism with surgical precision in The Drama of the Gifted Child, though the gift she was describing is not the kind that is celebrated. The gifted child, in Miller's analysis, is the child whose emotional sensitivity is so acute that they become, almost inevitably, the emotional support system for the adults around them. The child does not experience this as a role, Miller observed. The child experiences it as love, as closeness, as the particular warmth that comes from being needed. And that warmth is real. The closeness is real. What gets installed beneath it, silently, is the belief that being needed is the precondition for being loved. That your value is located in your function. That if you stop managing the room, you will become invisible. What Miller was pointing to here was not simply dysfunction within one family, but a structure that repeats across generations with remarkable consistency. The sensitive child who learns that the way to be safe is to take responsibility, and then becomes an adult who cannot stop taking responsibility, even in rooms where no one is asking them to, even in situations where they did not cause what's wrong, even when the person they're trying to fix is telling them plainly that they are fine. Taking this further than Miller explicitly stated, the guilt doesn't just travel with you into new relationships. It shapes the relationships you choose. You are drawn with an uncanny consistency to people who need managing. Not consciously. Not because you enjoy it. But because your nervous system has learned that this is the texture of intimacy. That love is a state in which someone's well-being depends on your vigilance. The absence of that dependency doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like something is wrong. It feels, in the specific language of the body that never got the memo that childhood is over, like abandonment. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The one that doesn't soften easily. The guilt you carry, this formless, persistent, undirected guilt, has not only been a burden. It has also been a use. Not consciously. There is nothing malicious in what we're about to look at. But the psychological twist, the thing that movement for always requires, is not just naming the wound. It's naming how you have participated in keeping it alive. Not because you wanted to, but because it served a function that was once necessary and has become habitual. The guilt kept you close. When you were a child and the guilt was first installed, it was the mechanism by which you stayed safe. Stay attuned. Stay vigilant. Stay responsible. If you let yourself off the hook, if you decided that someone else's emotional state was not your problem, you risked the withdrawal of the warmth that came from being needed. The guilt was the price of the attachment. And you paid it over and over because the attachment was worth more to you than the discomfort of the guilt. You are no longer a child. But the guilt doesn't know that. It is still operating by the logic of the household where it was formed. Still running its original calculation. If I feel responsible, I am safe. If I stop feeling responsible, I am alone. The guilt has calcified around a logic that was once true and is no longer. And here is the part that is difficult to sit with. You have been, in ways you may not have recognized until right now, choosing the guilt. Not consciously, but choosing it. Because the alternative, releasing it, feels in your body like falling. Every time you've apologized when no apology was owed, you were choosing the guilt. Not because you're broken. Because you were maintaining a known quantity in a place where the unknown felt more dangerous. Every time you've shrunk in conflict, taken the blame for someone else's mood, inserted yourself as the solution to a problem you didn't create, you were running a program so old you've forgotten writing it. A program designed for a house you no longer live in, by a child who needed it to survive. And this is where the mirror has to be held steady. Not accusingly, but steadily. Because the question is not whether what happened to you was unfair. It was. The question is not whether the adults who needed you to carry this were wrong to let you carry it. They were. The question now is whether you are willing to see that you have become someone who reaches for the weight even when no one is handing it to you. Who creates situations where the weight is available. Who feels in its absence not relief but vertigo. That vertigo. You know what I'm talking about. The strange discomfort of being in a relationship where no one is broken. Where no one needs managing. Where someone says they're fine and they mean it. And something in you doesn't trust it. Something in you keeps looking for the hidden damage. Keeps waiting for the mood to shift. Keeps preparing for the emergency that would finally make the vigilance make sense. What does it feel like to sit in a room where nothing is wrong and know, viscerally, that you don't know how to just be there? There is a layer beneath the twist that the twist does not reach. It is this: the guilt is not just a habit. It is an identity. Somewhere along the way, somewhere in the years between the child who first reached for someone else's pain and the adult you became, the guilt stopped being something you carried and became something you were. It became the structure through which you knew yourself. The responsible one. The one who notices. The one who shows up. The one who makes things better. Strip that away and the question that surfaces is not, what will I carry instead? The question is, who will I be? This is why intellectual understanding doesn't move it. You can read everything written on this subject. You can understand the mechanism with complete clarity, the absorbed shame, the parentified child, the nervous system shaped around vigilance, and still wake up in the morning with the guilt intact. Because understanding happens at the level of the mind, and the guilt is not located there. It is located in the part of you that existed before you had a mind sophisticated enough to name it. It is somatic. It is structural. It is the architecture of the self, not a room inside the self. And if the guilt is the architecture, then releasing it isn't just about putting something down. It is about being willing to not know for a moment what holds you up. Most people aren't willing. Not because they're cowardly, but because the disorientation of losing an identity, even a painful one, even one that has cost them years, is genuinely more frightening than the ongoing cost of keeping it. The known suffering is preferable to the unknown freedom. The weight is familiar. The lightness is suspect. The guilt that has no object is not yours. It is the shape someone else's failure took when it needed somewhere to live. This is what Jung was pointing toward when he described the unlived life as the heaviest burden. Because the unlived life of a parent doesn't just sit in the parent. It finds the most available container. And the most available container is almost always the child who loves them most, who is most attuned to them, who would do anything to see them relieved. The child who would, without being asked, bend their own developing self into whatever shape would make the parent's burden lighter. That child is extraordinary. That child is also, decades later, still carrying something they picked up before they were old enough to understand what they were doing. But here is what no one tells you about identity. It is not as stable as it feels. It is a pattern of activation, not a fixed structure. It was assembled, which means it can be disassembled, not all at once, not without terror, but incrementally, through the specific practice of refusing the weight when it arrives uninvited. Through the experience, accumulated slowly, of a moment passing in which someone in the room is unhappy, and you do not intervene, and the world does not end, and you are still there. Still present. Still loved. Still, in some way you are only beginning to believe possible enough. What you are terrified of finding on the other side of the guilt is nothing. That without the function of managing others, you will be invisible. That the love was always conditional on the service. That if you stop performing the role, the warmth withdraws. You have been living as though that fear were already proven. As though the evidence were in. As though the experiment had been run and returned a result. But it hasn't. You have never actually let go of the weight long enough to see what is underneath it. You have never allowed yourself the prolonged experience of being present without being useful. Of being in the room without being needed. Of being seen not for what you carry but for what you are. That is what is waiting on the other side. Not nothing. Something you have no category for yet, which is why it feels like nothing. But it isn't nothing. It is you, underneath what you were handed. Still there. Patient. Waiting with a tenacity that should tell you something about how much it wants to be found. There is a distinction that this entire conversation has been building toward. Not slowly. Deliberately. Because it cannot be handed to you at the beginning. You have to arrive at it. The distinction is between guilt that belongs to you and guilt that was assigned to you. Between the signal that says I did something that harmed someone I care about, and there is something I can do to repair it, and the noise that has been running underneath everything, formless and relentless, that says you are, in some fundamental way, responsible for conditions you did not create. The first kind of guilt is your conscience. It is not comfortable, but it is yours. It points somewhere. It asks something of you that you are capable of giving. When you attend to it, it quiets. It has a life cycle. It resolves. The second kind is not your conscience. It is an installation. It does not quiet when you attend to it. It does not have a life cycle. It does not resolve. Because it was never about anything you actually did. It was about something someone else needed to put somewhere. To feel these as different things, in your body, not just your mind, requires a kind of discernment that doesn't come from reading about it. It comes from practice. From the repeated, uncomfortable experience of being handed something and asking before you take it, does this belong to me? Not rhetorically. Not defensively. Genuinely. Is this mine? And some of what arrives will be yours. You will have done things that need attending to. You will have hurt people, failed people, chosen yourself when you shouldn't have. That guilt is real and it deserves your attention. It deserves your repair. Do not use this video to avoid that. The point is not to stop taking responsibility. The point is to start taking accurate responsibility, which means neither absorbing everything that floats toward you, nor discarding what is genuinely yours. The person you are becoming, the one this video has been pointing toward without naming directly, is someone who can hold both. Who can feel guilt without drowning in it, who can say I'm sorry when something is genuinely owed, and who can hold their ground in the silence when it isn't. Who has, finally, a way of telling the difference. That is not a small thing. For someone who has spent years unable to find the line between their own wrongness and the wrongness of the world they were handed, finding that line is an enormous thing. It does not happen all at once. It does not happen because you understood it. It happens the first time you are in a room where someone's mood shifts and you pause before moving toward it and you ask yourself, is this mine? And you wait for the honest answer. And you act from that rather than from the old reflex. The weight you have been carrying that was never yours is real. The carrying is real. The years of it are real. None of that gets undone by understanding. But something has shifted in the reading of it. The guilt you feel tomorrow will arrive into a different context than the guilt you felt yesterday. It will arrive into a self that knows now that guilt can be installed, that it can be inherited, that it can be the shape someone else's failure takes when it needs somewhere to live. And that knowledge is not absolution. But it is not nothing either. It is the difference between a cage you are trapped in and a cage you can see. Seeing the bars is not the same as being free. But you cannot find the door until you know there is one. The guilt that was never yours was also never the truth about you. That is what this whole video was built to give you. Not comfort. Not permission to avoid your conscience. But a precision instrument for the work of figuring out what, in the weight you've been carrying, actually has your name on it. And what can finally, not easily, not immediately, but finally, be set down. You were a child who loved someone who needed more than they could hold. You became a person who learned to hold what others couldn't. That capacity is real and it is yours and there is nothing wrong with it. What is wrong is the belief that it is the only reason you are worth keeping. What is wrong is the reflex that fires before you can think, that moves you toward the weight before you've asked whether it belongs to you. The child who first picked it up deserved someone to carry it for them. That child did not get that. What you can give that child now, which is the closest thing available to what they deserved, is the decision not to pass it forward anymore. Not into your relationships. Not into the hours when you lie awake tallying what you might have done wrong in a day that was mostly fine. Not into the apologies that cost you something for sins you did not commit. Set it down. Not perfectly. Not forever on the first try. But set it down and notice what your hands feel like when they're empty. And let yourself discover, slowly, that empty hands are not the same as worthlessness. They are what you need in order to finally reach for something that belongs to you. The guilt that was never yours was also never the truth about you. This channel is where those distinctions get made precisely. If you're tired of carrying things that don't belong to you, stay here.